We hebben ook een buitenlandse gast vandaag. Die zit eigenlijk op deze plek. En als u denkt, ik zie niks, dan klopt dat. Omdat hij nu hier voor de deur staat. Hij komt net uit Den Haag, waar hij de Martin Luther King-lezing heeft gehouden. En hij kan echt elk moment hier bij ons aan tafel zitten. En dan praten we met dominee Jesse Jackson.
En we praten ook met Charles Groenhuizen uit de Verenigde Staten. We praten met hem over wat er in Wall Street gedaan is. En vergelijken dat met de commissie De Wit. Maar we praten ook met hem over een jaar Obama. En over de rol van Jesse Jackson, voor wie graag een hartelijk applaus.
Okay. Mr. Jackson, welcome in our program.
Welcome.
Very well.
So you just
We made
came...
it. We made it.
You made it from The Hague, right?
Made it from The Hague.
Yeah. It was the Martin Luther King lecture. Where was it about? The lecture. You had a Martin Luther King lecture. Right?
Indeed.
Yeah?
Well, Dr. King's application today, the relevance of a leader who will dream beyond the status quo, who will fight to realize his dream, one who, because he dreamed and risked, he fundamentally changed America in many ways, the Western world. America, he helped to democratize democracy. He helped to globalize our thinking. And we live today out of that process. And so from Dr. King's life and living to where we are today with Barack Obama as America's first African-American president, and much of our worldview is shaped by Dr. King.
Did you have a special message for the Dutch people there in The Hague?
Well, it is that the dream is elusive. We won yesterday's battles, but there are battles in front of us today. Since we've won freedoms, but now we've globalized capital, we've not globalized human rights, workers' rights, women's rights, children's rights, environmental security. And therefore, these trade imbalances, not so much between North and South, not as much between East and West, but between North and South. Too few people are monopolizing capital. Too many have too little. In America, we have one might say it's noonday, high noon in our politics, but midnight in our economy. The bank collapsed. We bailed the banks out without linking it to reinvestment, without linking it to lending. And the result is Wall Street stock is rising, but poverty is rising, and unemployment is rising. Home foreclosures are rising. Student loan defaults are rising. Credit card scams are rising. So the president has the awesome challenge now of trying to correct the huge imbalances and disparities in our economy.
We're going to talk about the financial crisis with two of our other guests. And we remember footage of you demonstrating on Wall Street. Maybe we can... Oh, we do not have it.
But for the few people who forgot who you were, there is some pictures and movies from the past.
Oh boy.
Our time has come!
Dominee Jesse Jackson is Amerika's belangrijkste burgerrechtenactivist. Hij wordt geboren in 1941 in een land waar door rassenscheiding zwarten niet dezelfde rechten hebben als blanken.
I'm not going to serve you.
Because of my race.
Move on. I'm not going to serve you.
Why?
Tijdens zijn studie theologie sluit hij zich aan bij de beweging van Martin Luther King, voorvechter van gelijke rechten voor alle rassen.
I have a dream.
Jackson is erbij wanneer King wordt vermoord.
I said, Dr. King, just as he straightened up, I said, Dr. King, and the bullet exploded in his face.
Na Kings dood blijft Jesse Jackson vechten voor gelijke rechten. Jackson is ook de man die onderhandelt met leiders als Saddam Hussein, Fidel Castro en Slobodan Milosevic over de vrijlating van Amerikaanse gevangenen.
America will get better and better. Keep hope alive.
Tweemaal deed Jackson een poging om eerste zwarte president van Amerika te worden.
I love you very much.
Tevergeefs. 20 jaar later lukt het Barack Obama wel.
Okay, we're going to talk with Jesse Jackson about 1 year Obama. You're still on board of his presidency, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He has a high moral compass with a plethora of problems. For example, I thought the speech in Egypt challenging religions to exact the highest values and not use religion as a cover for terrorism was a profound statement. I thought his bailing the banks out was the right thing to do, but without linkage, it's proven to be an error so far that must be corrected. Even the health care fight, which has been so contentious a fight, we needed 50 million Americans have no health insurance. 50 million Americans are malnourished in all that wealth, and the 50 million more need health care and can't get it. So we need it. It's more than right. But there are those who will fight the health care bill just because of anti-Obama mania. There are those who fight it just to defeat him or discredit him in some way. And the contradictions, I see people with a Medicare card in one hand and a Social Security card in the other hand, and an unemployment compensation check arguing against big government. It's a contradiction in terms. Yes. But he's fit for that fight. I thought when he went to the Republican caucus last week and took them on head on before global television, it showed his strength and his will to fight back. And now those who voted for him last year must rally behind him this year and not just be observers.
You're here for the Martin Luther King lecture. There's a long road between Martin Luther King and President Obama, and you were on that road.
It is a long road because America is a different and a better nation 40 years later. You know, I think about August 28, 1955, Emmett Till was lynched, and they didn't pursue the lynch mob. That's one America. It's August 28, 1963, his dreaming that would break the open, with under the broken promises. August 2008, President Barack being the nominee. That shows a real social progress in the country. And while we have grown politically to a new level of maturity, we're learning to play ball together and fight war together and vote together. In the meantime, we took our eyes off of kind of monopoly capital. And right now, while we're excited with the joy of our politics, the pain of our economy right now is bad and I think getting worse.
When Obama was elected, didn't you think just for a brief moment it couldn't be me on that stage?
No, that didn't hit me. No, I know the role I played in that process. What had me in tears that night was, A, the joy of that moment. I knew people who may have been in some distant village in Kenya or in Haiti or in Ireland was hoping that that guy, maybe whose name they couldn't even pronounce, that guy would win, that different kind of exciting guy would win, but they might hurt him or they might take the election from him as they did in the Gore-Bush debacle. But it just couldn't happen. And so I felt their desire. But I thought about the martyrs who made that night possible. I just wish Dr. King or Meg Evans could have been there just for a moment to see the fruit of their labors. And so the sense of history converged on me. That's why I felt that way that night. And I'm glad that we elected him as our president. And I know that we now have the burden not just to elect him, but to stand with him as he fights to do a difficult thing, change some real difficult entrenched habits in our economy.
You always were more outspoken about your ethnicity. Let's look at a speech from you.
I am somebody. I am somebody. I may be poor. I am somebody. I am black, beautiful, proud. I must be respected. I must be protected. What time is it? When we stand together, what time is it? When we say no more yes to vote, what time is it? What time is it? What time is it?
That's not the way Obama did it.
Well, with a different stage of our development, we were then fighting to overcome a crippling sense of inferiority, a crippling sense of inadequacy, a crippling sense of inadequacy. Then we had to fight for the right to vote. Then we began to grow in a very different kind of way. We now have an African-American governor of New York, of all the people of New York, an African-American governor of Massachusetts. We see the country is changing. This Sunday...
You wouldn't give the same speech now?
No. We wouldn't have to give it now because white America is more mature. It is less fearful of relating to blacks. And so, can you imagine, I was jailed this year, 50 years ago, trying to use a public library.
Mm-hmm. That's a huge progress.
This week, February 1st, 1964, students sought to drink some coffee, and they were denied. But where they were rejected is now an international museum. So The rejected songs have now become the cornerstone. So one sees a growth taking place, and I would say in a 60-year race, President Barack Obama ran the last lap of that race, a magnificent race, but really it was a 60-year journey from Truman desegregating the military in 48, to the 54 decision, to Dr. King's work, to where we are today. It's been a 60-year journey, and one sees a gradual movement upward toward a more socialized and more sensitive country on these questions.
I followed your campaigns in 84, 88, read your book, a book about your campaign, Thunder in America. Is this, according to Obama, the thunder you had in mind?
Well, this is the lightning.
It's the lightning. The thunder will come.
But the point is, I remember one time talking with President Obama, and he said when we were debating in Oklahoma University with Hart and Mondale, my campaign was seen to Smith as a kind of novelty because it was a breakthrough. As a student, he said this can happen. So part of you, when we're trying to be transformers, we sow seeds and hope they will germinate. We did not know when it would happen, but we knew it was possible. I mean, I won Vermont. I won Michigan. Whites had begun to, I beat Gore and Gephardt in Iowa in '88. We could see that this thing was possible, but in these years, we've seen a growth in the immigrant population maturing, and whites becoming less afraid, blacks becoming more assertive, a vast new Latino population, and more energized young population. So America has fundamentally grown in these last years, and he's the beneficiary of and epitomizes that growth.
Do you end up being optimistic?
I'm very hopeful. I'm hopeful because I've seen so much of the journey. I mean, from the slave ship to the White House is a long journey. And you don't measure just about where we are, but where we came from. It was not that long. When Harold Washington became mayor of Chicago in '83, the Democratic leadership formed a third party. They now rallied behind President Barack Obama. I mean, when Mayor Tom Bradley became mayor of Los Angeles, that became a national story. Now it's commonplace. So one has to appreciate the kind of political, more of us go to school together, work together, vote together. But while the break is that while this political socialization is taking place, we've democratized politics, we've now moved toward monopoly capital. And so we have the joy of winning politically, but the pain of sinking economically. And that must be put back in sync again.
But with a black president, there are still racial injustice or racial barriers, I guess.
Well, to be sure, because the legacy of racial separation is so deep. Chicago, last year, 3,200 blacks die a year from health care disparity. Mm-hmm. That's more who die a year from health care disparity than died in the 9/11 terror attack several years ago. While we're number one in football, basketball, baseball, and all of that, we're also number one in infant mortality, number one in short life expectancy, number one in the prison population, number one in poverty. 2.3 million Americans are in prison, 1.2 million are African American, and 500,000 are Latino. So if you are poor or black or brown, you're more likely to go to jail than you are to college. There are more young black men in jail than there are in college. So there are some terrible disparities there, and you need an aggressive Department of Justice to offset those disparities, because, you know, we do very well on the football field or the baseball. You wonder why? Whenever the playing field is even. Mm-hmm. And the rules are public, the goals are clear, and the referees are fair, we do well. Beyond the ball field, the playing field is not even, and that becomes our unfinished task.
Yeah, but the black president makes the playing field more even, you think?
Well, he lifts our aspirations level. When the Department of Justice announced that we will crack down on reverse redlining, it's a step in the right direction. And one knows that now that there is someone in the White House who is not indifferent to racial justice, mm-hmm. not indifferent to gender equality, and pro-public education for all of the children, those are huge steps in the right direction.
And what will happen with the Afro-Americans when Obama fails, when he is not re-elected?
He's not going to fail.
Suppose.
No, I don't need to.
He's losing his support.
But he is now, you know, in campaigning with the novelty and excitement, he was soaring. Mm-hmm. When you're campaigning, but governing, you've got to be on the field. And only people on the field whose uniforms are clean, those on the bench. On the field of play, politics is a contact sport. It's a big fight to begin to restructure our banks. It's a big fight to expand health care coverage. It's a big fight to not giving tax subsidy to class leaving America going to China, for example. He's engaged in the right fights. And I think he's young enough, strong enough, bright enough, he's fit for those fights.
But suppose he won't be re-elected.
We have survived setbacks and failures for so long. We know even when we're down, the ground is no place for a champion. Part of our strength is resiliency, the capacity to bounce back. We cannot go back from where we were.
You mean it's irreversible?
We cannot unscramble that egg. The fact that we could be president, there's nothing we cannot be. There's no state we cannot be governor of. There's no company we cannot be CEO of. There's nothing politically, social we cannot do or become. That will never change again. The coefficient of expansion is of such. We've swollen up, we're not going backwards.
Frits, jij zei dat je blij was dat wij Jesse Jackson aan tafel hadden vanavond. Je zei, ik heb al zijn boeken gelezen. Waardoor werd jij geraakt als jonge Nederlandse witte man om Jesse Jackson te gaan lezen?
Die speech die dominee Jackson destijds hield, iedere keer die zin, keep hope alive. En de metafoor die hij gebruikte destijds over die jongen die zijn gehandicapte zus omhoog tilde. The boy who raised his disabled sister. You mentioned it once in one of your speeches. And you mentioned keep hope alive, keep hope alive. Dat vond ik zo'n ontzettend mooi moment. En ik heb er echt met ontroering naast gaan kijken destijds.
Thuis, gewoon in Nederland?
Gewoon thuis. Ik was, hoe oud was ik? 3, 24 jaar of zo. Dat vond ik echt geweldig. En daardoor was ik heel erg getriggerd op het hele verhaal.
Hoe ben jij geraakt door Jesse Jackson?
Leadership must speak to the moment. I mean, Dr. King's arguments for the Montgomery Bus boycott wouldn't apply today. He spoke to the isness of that moment. It was a different speech to sit-ins by 1960. Yet a different one in Selma. Because we went to Selma, it was not for blacks, and the white women couldn't serve on juries. Farmers who couldn't pay poll taxes couldn't vote. I was in North Carolina 2 days ago, and there was a white female governor of that state and a white female U.S. senator from that state. They too benefited from Selma. Out of that, 18-year-olds got the right to vote. And then bilingual voting. And then fair apportionment. And so we must appreciate the growth process, and President Obama inherits a tailwind from many years of pushing the envelope forward. With all of our unfinished business, we are a different nation tonight than we have been.
Charles, we hadden het net over dat Obama iets minder populair wordt.
Iets meer dan iets.
Nou, vertel.
Nou ja, het loopt natuurlijk, de populariteit loopt echt heel snel terug. Wat je ziet is dat hij natuurlijk de verwachtingen geweldig hoog had gewekt. En de populariteit van hem persoonlijk ook gigantisch was. Ook na de verkiezingen nog. En vaak is hij als persoon nog weer populairder dan de ideeën die hij heeft. Omdat hij als persoon door heel veel Amerikanen geweldig bewonderd wordt. Ja, dat zakt nu snel weg. Dat is natuurlijk heel treurig.
Maar is dat ook bij de zwarte Amerikanen?
Nee. Als je naar de cijfers kijkt en wat er nu wegloopt, dat zijn de gematigde kiezers. Die hem uiteindelijk het presidentschap gegeven hebben. Want natuurlijk kreeg hij de stemmen van de African Americans, een overgrote meerderheid. Maar je hebt veel meer natuurlijk nodig. En met name ook die blanke, gematigde kiezers in het midden.
En daar gaat
die lopen nu massaal weg. Maar wat je ook hoort, ik spreek ook democraten, vrienden van ons, die ook aan de linkerkant van die democratische partij zitten. Die nu een jaar later, onder andere over de dingen die dominee Jackson noemt, over die banken bijvoorbeeld, die niet alleen teleurgesteld zijn, maar langzamerhand kwaad beginnen te worden. Van dat he doesn't live up to the promises. Hij maakt zijn beloftes, vinden zij, niet waar.
Nou, kan dat niet?
But in a four-quarter ball game, you cannot be conclusive at the end of the first quarter. Right. I mean, and he's facing an unusual level of hostile resistance. You got a network dedicated to his destruction.
Fox News.
You have a political party that is ideologically opposed to ideas he puts forth, even in their best interest. That is a different wall of resistance. And yet, at the end of the day, those who oppose him on ideological grounds will be fighting their own best interests. I mean, to defeat Barack is to defeat blank stabilization. To defeat him is to defeat comprehensive health care. To defeat him is to defeat the Kyoto Treaty. To defeat him is to take us back from a new global view of foreign policy. So I'm convinced that these are very difficult times, but we must not retreat, we must rally.
Maar de vraag blijft, na november 2008, Obama wordt gekozen, de euforie bij heel veel Amerikanen is gigantisch. Change, change, change. Het land gaat echt veranderen. Veel Amerikanen dachten, met progressief denkende Amerikanen, we krijgen echt een ander land. We gaan echt...
Maar dat kan toch ook niet in een jaar? Ik denk
Nee,
dat de verwachtingen veel te hoog zijn.
Maar omdat mensen hebben die haast wel.
Het lijkt mij helemaal niet zo gek dat je in het begin van je presidentsperiode... dat je niet populair bent. Ik denk dat veel van de economie afhangt. En als die economie verbetert, dat het aan het eind van de periode... de economie er beter voor kan staan... en dat de Amerikanen anders stemmen. En ik denk dat die verwachtingen gewoon een beetje ridicuul waren op dat moment.
Kijk, een historische parallel is Bill Clinton. Wordt in 92 gekozen. Het gaat onmiddellijk daarna gaat het mis met zijn healthcare-plan toen. Was absoluut niet populair. En in 94 krijgt hij echt ontzettend op zijn donder bij de congresverkiezingen. En in 96 wordt hij met vlag en wimpel herkozen.
And Clinton changed direction. So I think President Obama is part professor and part president. He's so smart and so detailed. Roosevelt had a simple message. A chicken in every pot for the hungry, jobs for the unemployed, foreclosures, moratorium on foreclosures, and restructure the banks. It was a message the common people could get. Right now, we are doing a top-down economic development, and trickle-down is not working. The restructure must be a bottom-up commitment to things people really understand. Jobs now. A healthcare plan that's cheap and more accessible now. Or restructure banks now. That is a fight America will fight for across lines of party and region.
Maar ik denk dat heel veel mensen die met heel veel enthousiasme op Obama gestemd hebben... toch een soort naïef idee hadden dat door de verkiezing van Obama... het land echt zou veranderen. En wat je nu ziet, bijvoorbeeld in de reactie op dat healthcare-plan... waarvan heel veel Amerikanen zeggen... socialism, communism, dat is extreem, dat is extreem, uiteraard. Maar als je naar de opiniepeilingen kijkt... heel veel Amerikanen willen die herstructurering van... de gezondheidszorg helemaal niet.
Dat zijn allemaal dagkoersen. Misschien het goede nieuws voor...
They call Roosevelt communist. Yeah. They call him socialist. But the same people call him all those names now accept Social Security. But they now accept more medical care. They now accept more public education. So leaders get their stars from their scars. And you cannot be a great leader that you're willing to take the sacrifice and take the hit of being a change agent. He said he would rather win one time and not win a second time than to have a season of folly without challenge. And I think fighting the healthcare fight, fighting this growth of terrorism, fighting banker behavior, these are tough but the right fights.
Goed. We zijn aan het einde van onze uitzending.
Just one question, maybe it's beyond the subject, but you mentioned 9/11. The Dutch cabinet is now struggling with the question if we should continue our military presence in Afghanistan. What would you advise the Dutch government?
I think that the adventure to Afghanistan is not well advised. We've gone from 30,000 to 100,000 troops in Afghanistan in the past few months. And while we take the troops into Afghanistan, the guy at the baby diaper comes from Yemen on the airplane. That is a very expensive, risky venture. And I think people have been slow to protest because there's reasonable doubt. You hope it is successful. You think it might not, but because of his popularity, people are giving him some latitude. But the movement, the expansion to Afghanistan, is not a popular one, and seems not to be a necessary one with a winning, predictable winning formula. Colin Powell's advice was, unless you can see victory, don't jump in. And right now, there's no promise. The promise is we'll get out quick. The promise is not, because victory has not been defined. And so because victory is rather hazy and elusive, I think without clarity, one should not go any further into Afghanistan.
But should the Dutch stay or leave?
Well, that's the choice for you to make. If you want to go, if you want to go further, if you want to go further into a war where victory cannot be defined, if you want to go further into a war that is more expensive without predictable results, then go that route, but I wouldn't recommend it.
Okay. Sorry, we have to interrupt you. Thank you for joining us.
Out of time.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
And don't underestimate my Dutch.
Of course not.